Hello and welcome to my quick run through of my RSA 2012 presentation called Modern Cyber Gangs, Well Organized, Well Protected and a Smart Adversary. Now before I begin I need to give a quick health and safety warning, as I normally do, because lots of the things that I'm going to demonstrate and talk about involve malicious code samples from the wild. So it's very important you don't go looking for them, to make sure that you don't infect yourself with malicious code and perhaps do harm to those around you. That said, a quick introduction to me if you haven't come across me before. I'm the Director of Technology Strategy at Sophos, and here you can see my wonderfully official marketing photo. Indeed, possibly all of Sophos' marketing budget went on photoshopping this picture to make me look semi-respectable and don me in a suit, not of tweed inclination. But normally I prefer to look a lot more like this, because I am, by true nature, a little bit geeky. And of course, if we built in my recent use of Macs and the desire to present, then of course we have to pay respect to my mock turtleneck fanboyage in this progression below. And you may also find me sometimes presenting under the handle advanced idea in the press and media that cybercriminals are well organised. It's organised crime today, but the actual traits, the behaviour changes aren't often explored. So what I want to talk about in this presentation is what's actually changed, how have the bad guys evolved, and what lessons do we need to learn from that? And I have my standard maturity model that I like to use to talk about how the bad guys are growing up and changing. So we go from the first example, malicious code that was designed to prank and be fun. You know, the infamous big green worm that would eat all of your documents before pooing in the bottom left-hand corner. And then we move on to, as we know from years previous, the Nigerian and Brazilian bankers that want to give you $63 million because they like your face or something, or Britney Spears nude and naked sideways, you know, the usual culprits that we've all got used to deleting. Then we move into organised cybercrime, and what I like to call cybercrime cloud unicorns, following on from some of the other themes at RSA. And it's this notion the bad guys have produced products, tools and services which they're now selling to each other. They're enabling each other to do cybercrime more effectively and taking a lot of the technology barriers out of producing quality malicious code. And one of the impacts of that is a massive increase in volume. But we can't forget, of course, that it's not just the cybercriminals that persist in making this a problem. We still have a huge problem with awareness, with the social side of cybercrime, where people click on quite ridiculous things. In fact, you only need to look at this bottom example. Expletive in large patch will make your expletive so large you'll be able to park a car on it and be slightly astonished that people clicked on it. I mean, for one, that sounds painful and probably dangerous, to see that we still have a lot to do in education. But nonetheless, the quantity and the quality of malware is escalating. We're now sometimes in Sophos labs seeing astonishing peaks of malicious code, over 185,000 individual samples every day. And each year that volume is building at a terrifying rate, causing traditional security controls to come under more and more pressure. So let's take a look at some of these cybercrime tools and how impressive they've now become. So here we have a Crimepack, and this is just one of the examples out there. I found about 30 of these from different criminal gangs, but this one's a personal favourite because it comes with video documentation and a rather pleasing looking installation process. And this toolkit is designed to make it really, really easy for the bad guys to infect people, to track the success of their campaigns and generate new malicious code and avoid the bad guys. Now you'll see here in this installation widget there's an install password required, which is a little bit like a serial number. So this is perhaps one of the cases where it's a good thing to pirate software, a rare occasion indeed. And we run through all of this setup procedure, then the system dumps us to a screen where we can see it's created all the necessary databases and back-end information to track our cybercrime, before finally getting us to this lovely web-based user interface where we can log in and authenticate with the Crimepacks. This is obviously a fairly unusual design, in this case probably inferring that this particular cybercrime gang is angry with their mothers, or I believe this is known technically as being badass. But nonetheless, an impressive web application. If we move through to the dashboard, then we really start to see why people talk about this now as organised crime, how it's a business. This dashboard shows us exactly how many hits we've had to our nasty malicious code page, how successful we've been at driving traffic. It shows us the number of loads, how many people have loaded our malicious code, and the exploit rate, how often we've succeeded in crashing the browser or getting our malware to run. So that's pretty nice business mature dashboard reporting. Now if we look down at this exploit stats, we can see some of the commonly targeted vulnerabilities. No surprises, Java, PDF and ActiveX making common appearances here. As we know, the bad guys are tracking this stuff, and as companies and individuals have got better at updating their Windows systems, in some cases thanks to Microsoft's enhanced efforts in this area, we start to see the bad guys using those little applications in and around the browser like Java that far less frequently get patched. And we've also got a little bit more reporting information in here on operating systems. In some of these crime packs you also get countries and a breakdown of host names or other interesting information. Some of these tools sometimes even verge on being a customer relationship management tool, with some of the fake AV gangs having add-ons to support tracking customer names and serial numbers, in some cases even calling their customers up to try and upsell them things like premium support. A bizarre concept for me, given that the standard offering is already fairly undesirable. So let's switch over to the live version of this particular crime pack and have a look at it a little more closely. Insert random scene change to keep things interesting. So what I've got here is a live copy of this crime pack, and to use it I've donned this pair of cybercriminal sunglasses as a suitable mask of identity. Worked for Clark Kent. So what we can do is we can log in to our dashboard with admin and password, suitably realistic real-world credentials. And here we can see that dashboard that I was just talking about. Now before we do anything else, we're going to take a look at the settings pane, where you can see how easy it is to configure this tool, creating new credentials. This is a very interesting feature. This enables the bad guys to configure a URL to redirect traffic to if it's deemed non-vulnerable. So if none of these vulnerabilities work, perhaps if you've already visited this page, maybe the second time you're coming back as a forensics specialist to try and capture it, or if you're on a shared vendor blacklist where they're trying to track IP addresses and block the good guys from getting to their nasty code. And you can also configure the vulnerabilities that are used. Pretty nasty stuff. Over here we've got the ability to generate malicious code, and this creates a new iframe. As you can see, every time I click on the link it obfuscates and changes all of the content in an effort to make it difficult for vendors like Sophos to statically detect and prevent this stuff from executing. It's made very, very easily. Some other toolkits, like this one here, contain multiple different styles of obfuscation that can all be changed as well, and these get updated sometimes as often as every few days by the bad guys in an effort to make it hard for security companies to block this stuff. So the cyber criminals would take this nasty code, insert it into a web page that they've compromised, maybe using SQL injection, or they might put it into a HTML attachment in an email or something like that, and then people get redirected to this bad code. So let's switch back over to our crime pack here. We'll clear any previous efforts out, and let's go to our handy Windows XP computer. Now it's a bit like Windows 7. Anything I use here would work on that platform too. I'm just using Windows XP because if you've ever tried to run Windows 7, Linux virtual machine and a Mac OS X host on a MacBook Air simultaneously, you'll know that the result is an internal temperature of the core somewhat similar to that of the sun, a large amount of smoke and fire. So I'm using this for lightweight purposes. Now in this case, in my email inbox, I've got a rather comical little spam, and if we read through this, it's basically asking us to click on this link. So we'll click on the link and we get this randomly generated content here, again in an effort to make it hard to statically detect the web page. Now the browser immediately crashes, and what's happened is it's firing off vulnerabilities left, right and centre. This window pops up, doesn't always happen. In this case I don't like the look of it, so I'm closing it down, but it's too late. The bad guys have run their malicious code, and this copy of AV Defender 2011 pops up. And this is a piece of fake antivirus. That is a virus pretending to be a real AV product. This imitation is the highest form of flattery. We should be very flattered indeed. And now we can see it running an amazingly fast scan of our computer. It's almost like it's not doing anything at all, and it's just pretending to run a malicious code scan. If we switch back over to our Crimepacks system and refresh the dashboard, we can see we've successfully executed code. We've got a 100% exploit rate, and in this case it was an MDAC vulnerability that was used on Windows XP. So we've got our malware running. Skipping back over here, we can see very effective social engineering. The bad guys have pulled in one of my documents, medicaldatabase.doc, and claimed that it's infected. And that's clever because obviously I care about my documents, so I'm going to want to do something about it. Now, this particular piece of fake antivirus wasn't delivered by this Crimepack. I've mixed these samples together, but the bad guys could deliver whatever they happen to like. I do find this fake AV stuff rather astonishing, however. After all, if you clean it up, it does do something rather interesting. It says that we've exceeded our trial removal quota and we need to purchase the full version. So you can imagine users sitting here at this screen not knowing the difference between Sophos and AV Defender 2011, the virus, and they go through that process where they go, oh, yes, viruses. I remember what the IT guy told me about those and how they would, connect to my fridge wirelessly and make my milk go sour and scare my cat. And, well, they get the details wrong, but they basically know viruses are bad. So they try and clean this up. Unfortunately, the cybercriminals here demand that they pay money to run their malicious code. Amazing, amazing business model. And, of course, unfortunately, lots of people fall for this. But yeah, astonishing. The bad guys are able to charge people for running their malware. Luckily, you can get a 30-day evaluation version to see if you like having your data stolen and if it's a service that you'd like to continue to procure. So there you go. Very, very simple. Crimepack with little or no coding enables the bad guys to get their malicious code running and to easily track their campaigns. Pretty astonishing feature set. Now, in addition to cybercrime packs, software toolkits the bad guys produce to make it easier for them to infect people, they're also exploring hardware devices. Targeted attacks are getting much more common. So, as you can see, we have this tiny little device, got it here, fake CE certification, quite amusing. This particular one comes from an interesting case I was working on, and it originates from a Polish criminal gang, the cost of €71. Most impressive, has a full wireless card built in, supports WPA2 AES encryption for the Wi-Fi, of course. The cybercriminals like to take their crime very, very seriously, so security is of the utmost importance. 16 gigs of storage and AES 256 encryption. Logs over 28 different keyboard layouts, and can beam out any of the logged keyboard data, username and passwords at any time of day that's pre-specified pretty trivially. So the tools available to do cybercrime, both physical and software, are becoming much easier to use and sadly much more readily available. It's getting pretty dark in here, so I've managed to use a series of mirrors and lights from the bathroom in this hotel room to brighten the screen a little bit. Sorry about that. Anyway, so we've seen some of the toolkits that make it easy for the bad guys to generate new malicious code, and you can see how they've layered in evasion mechanisms, like constantly encrypting and changing the way that they pack their malicious code all the way through the chain, from the iframe to the obfuscated JavaScript to the exploit and down to the payload. And of course, the security industry aggressively focuses on detecting this stuff, trying to make sure people don't get infected. But a critical lesson no better painted than this wonderful feline picture from icanhascheeseburger.com. Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the bad guys are excellent at making just enough of an effort to do their job effectively. We see many instances where they do astonishingly clever things, like finding ways to get underneath the Windows operating system to make it hard to be detected, then using very basic anti-debugging and evasion techniques. We see forums where they're researching new technology and how to use HTML5, malware that uses IPv6 as a command and control mechanism. But often still, the basics work, and so this stuff isn't used yet. It's like it's left on a shelf waiting to be used when current techniques start to become ineffective. And we've seen that the bad guys have got incredibly mature. This is a wonderful screenshot found by a fellow security researcher where we can see the bad guys designing a functional specification outlining what they'd like their malicious fake AV program to look like so that they can have a third party develop it for them. And it's a rather attractive interface, better looking than many AV products. So they're constantly changing their tactics, and we have to learn to make sure that nothing is left unchallenged. Many people know about black search engine optimization, which was, until very recently, used as the major mechanism of distribution, tricking Google, Yahoo and others into, when you search for a certain celebrity or hot topic, redirecting to a compromised website or a malicious code page. This technique started to die off a little bit compared to traditional drive-by downloads as the bad guys learn that perhaps this is one way they can be latched onto. We see them doing clever things to perhaps bring in date and time data to make it really hard to track down their campaigns. Their scripts may rely upon execution at a particular moment in the day. For example, one example I saw where the bad guys would kind of put together a script, and this script would run and only decode if it happened to be the 13th second of the 13th minute every hour of the day. So 13 is quite literally unlucky for some. Now those time-based infections or the use of other data externally to the script are very clever, because if someone comes along to try and get that forensic artifact to analyse it after the original attack, it's actually pretty hard to reconstruct the chain of events. So very, very clever use by the bad guys here. So here's where the epic fail comes in. If you look at this chain, this is what many, many attacks look like today. A legitimate website, such as the top one, by the way, I'm not saying it's ever been compromised or even that it necessarily exists, gets linked with an iframe, a div, or some kind of other embedded asset to some munged JavaScript that's rotating, perhaps polymorphically, making it hard to detect, through to a hexploit, through to a malware generator that again polymorphically is generating new code in an effort to be hard to detect. And this pattern occurs all over the internet, with us finding a new one slightly less than every second. And this tennis game goes backwards and forwards. For example, if you take the black hole gang, then we're updating our generic detection where we try and detect their scripts and block them every couple of days. And that tennis game continues until someone breaks the racket and you have to invest in new technology and try and change it. The issue is that unfortunately lots of people are still only really focusing on one layer of this entire chain, and the objective is to stop the attack. And by focusing on every piece of the puzzle, we increase the probability of actually blocking it. You get a form of defense in depth. So lots of anti-malware solutions go for the bottom bit, when in fact very effective generic detection can often come from that third layer, from the munged JavaScript or the iframe or alike. So let's remember that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The bad guys produce anti-malware, we produce anti-malware, and so on and so on. They watch us like we watch them, and they react. They're building reputation systems where they share information about the IP addresses we're using in lab organizations or forensics teams. They bid downloaders and spiders, and they run quality assurance services in the cloud. I've seen lots of cases recently where Crimepacks will have the ability to hook in, via a nicely documented API, to third-party nasty QA services that will, for a small price, type in your credit card details, or if you're a cybercriminal, just steal them. You wouldn't use your own, that would be ridiculous. They will actually constantly test your malware, and the second that anti-malware vendors start to detect it, they'll automatically rotate to a new one. So they're building these systems, they're using automation, they're using the cloud effectively. And essentially, he who changes fastest has the last laugh. That's a bit of a losing battle, because as long as people are sticking to a 1990s model of security, they just need to try a little bit harder, and it's very easy for them to keep the edge. Okay, well, this is the only light now left in the hotel room, so I'll have to lie on the floor. So what to do about nothing? How do we tackle this challenge? And of course, there's no complete solution. There's no 100% in security. You can't ever block all of this stuff. But we can do significantly more than most people are. Firstly, there was a lot of discussion about this onion model, this defense in depth principle, but few organizations actually ever adopted it. And the idea was a pretty good one. By having more layers of security, practicing different mechanisms meshed on top of each other, kind of like layers of nets, you make the holes smaller through which the bad guys could attack or data could escape. Good principle, but it fell flat on its face because lots of the new modern security controls were overhyped, hard to adopt, and difficult. I went through that awful phase where HIPS was one of those technologies that people were scared to turn on because they had to configure some god-awful slider that went from 0 to 49 and set to 31 enabled the artificial intelligence vector-driven ontological analysis engine, which when called by kernel 32DR will Internet Explorer EXE and an x86 architecture, particularly range of memory using Shinkansen byte encoding when accessed by user B and IP address C at 1337 on a Tuesday, is good or bad. Frankly, no one has the time. They want the box that says, stop bad stuff. So we need to make security controls adoptable and easy so people can actually layer up their defenses. They need a more complete security solution as opposed to the rather horrifying reliance on 1990s AV, a bit of patching and a few passwords as many people have today. In particular, given how easy it is to generate new malicious code and launch targeted attacks, there's something really to be said for looking at truly behavioural controls. Now, it's a horrible buzzword. Lots of people kind of slap the behavioural line on just about anything they can. They talk about how they're analysing network packets behaviourally. Interesting concept, but in many cases that's just content security with a wild card. They're trying to guess what might happen. Looking at an actual endpoint, looking at the resulting code, executing and seeing what it does can be really powerful. For example, it's really hard to detect every future Adobe PDF exploit, but it's very easy to say, here are the good things and bad things that that program should never do. Creating an admin account, writing small files into System32, and various other malware-esque behaviours might be a good starting point to try and generically prevent malware. Lots of people still aren't running this stuff because it's too hard, but make sure that you're deploying it. Make sure you're using new bi-directional intelligence systems. The bad guys are rotating and changing this stuff really quickly using these Crimepacks. And now lots of vendors, for example, Sophos, we have our live protection capabilities, have built in the ability to get information back from endpoint clients fast. The old model of waiting for someone to get infected, capture a sample and post it to a labs before it was shared with the community just isn't good enough when the bad guys are using these tools in the cloud as they are. What we need is to receive real-time telemetry from the world so that we can analyze trends across the community and start to get samples faster and use these automation tips and tricks like the bad guys back against them. Now, you may also want to put some focus on logging and collection. Effectively, if the bad guys are coming up with new 0 days and new targeted code, you're going to want to make sure you have really good information for retrospective analysis. So you know what happened, you can learn, rinse, repeat, and harden yourself for next time. I've seen some interesting cases now where the bad guys will automatically delete their original infection code or overwrite it with a clean version, making it harder to get good forensic data. So make sure you've got a good logging and collection strategy so you can learn lessons and help the security industry do the same. But whilst it's very tempting to throw around all the buzzwords, APT, and talk about amazing hypervisor-esque rootkits that are going to run in the hardware layer and do all kinds of really cool and clever stuff to hack computers, actually, most of the time what goes wrong is still the basics. You only have to look at the Morto worm, which spread around lots of networks over the last year. Those domain administrators were leaving RDP connections open with things like password 2 and password 23. So a good old healthy focus on the basics is still what we need. Make sure in particular that you've got a patching strategy for the non-Microsoft stuff, Firefox, Adobe PDF, Java, etc. And to the industry, let's have that eternal focus on making this stuff easy and adoptable, killing the buzzwords and making sure that people can actually move beyond that 1990s model and bring themselves into the modern age of running some of these nice new security controls to help fight back against the bad guys. And let's think very carefully, knowing that our enemy here has counterintelligence about when we tear down command and control, when we start detecting things. And let's play this more as a chess game rather than an obvious version of drafts. There are some questions that can't be answered by Google. For the rest, that's me. You'll find me on Twitter ranting about malware, cybercrime, security, wherever I happen to be, and quite often tweed, though usually in better lighted conditions. And below you'll find a health and safety warning for the presentation that you've just watched, thanking and attributing to all of the individuals who shared images with me for this particular little prezzo. And of course, I hope that I'll be back at RSA 2013. I hope that you'll be able to use some of the advice in this presentation so we can make life a lot harder for the cyber criminals, and so that I can talk about something new and interesting next year. Thank you very much. Oh yes, one more thing. If you do want to know more about what we do at Sophos to implement lots of the things that I've just talked about, then you can find more information at sophos.com or give us a shout. Thanks.